Well, to kind of add to that,
Hopefully that.
you got to keep in mind the Jewish calendar follows the moon. Our
Right.
calendar follows the sun. So there's always
Right.
a reconciliation where we want, I hate to say it. I mean, we want Passover or Easter to fall on Sunday morning, Resurrection Day, and you're going to get to that. But we have to, because it's a reconciliation of the sun versus the moon. But the Hebrews, it doesn't matter if it's a Sunday or Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The the feast day falls in conjunction with the moon, and then is reconciled. But their dates don't how you say, their days and dates don't change like ours
Matt.
do, so to
Yeah.
speak. So to
Well,
speak.
and there's about a 15-day difference between, when you use the lunar calendar and you're going by the full moon, there's about a 15-day difference in the calendar. So it puts, in other words, the first of our month and the first of their month is always is difference of 15 days,
Right.
usually.
Until it's reconciled.
So
Yeah.
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 So what we call the first of Abib, what they call the first of Abib, and what we call the first of April, say, is off usually by 15 days. So, but the key, like you just said, you mentioned the full moon. Every time you see a full moon, that means that there's a feast. Usually, I mean, that's when they have their feast. It's always usually on a full moon. And that, you see that even true with some of these minor, even Hanukkah. This last year, I was noticing full moon at Hanukkah, Purim. You see it, in Passover, especially Shabbat, the Feast of Weeks. You see the full moon again. But they always time their feasts, or God, I should say, God does this because they didn't set these days. God did, and God set the orbits in motion of the moon and the sun and everything. He's the one that figured out this thing, so don't blame us. God did it. He figured all this out, and he's a genius when it comes to figuring this stuff out. He put a lunar orbit, it's kind of elliptical orbit together that actually works. And timing. It's like a time clock. And but it speaks of his people.
Right.
Which is
Well, and
different.
and remember, I mean,
Gentiles were always on a solar calendar.
right,
Remember.
and remember not to be flippant or indifferent on this, but remember the Hebrew calendar is feminine because it's in a cycle, and
28 days.
yeah,
28 days.
so and that'll come up later several times in teachings, not in the Passover, but but it'll be important to understand that it's a cycle. Let me just say that, and then move on. But
Yeah, it's a cycle.
okay,
We know what you're talking about.
right,
We've all experienced it one way or another.
right, both sides. So okay, so that Friday night's the Shabbat, and then so Saturday morning still the Shabbat, right?
Right.
Okay, and there's scripture that says something that gets everybody messed up over the next 2 days, right? But they're really 2 days, not one.
Well, I mean, it just says, and there, let me just get to it. Well, and then basically what happens, the next morning is that Yeshua, of course, they're in a place called Bethany. They're on top, and that's another thing we didn't talk about. They're in Bethany, which is 1.8 miles from Jerusalem, from where the temple's at. And that came important in the Lazarus thing too, by the way, because the timing of when Lazarus was resurrected. We'll do a one on that too. But that 1.8 miles, he comes to Bethany to resurrect Lazarus, and it was 1.8 miles from Jerusalem where he stayed that night. And then the next day, he's in. He was at Bethany, but which was what's important about that. It's 2 miles is the Sabbath limitation of travel on the
Sure,
Sabbath.
sure, right.
So we need to mention that. And Bethany just conveniently happens to be 1.8 miles, which is just under 2 miles. So that, the important thing is here is not to violate the Sabbath with traveling more than 2 miles.